My new boss announced my position was redundant to seat his friend in my spot. He never checked what the payout would be. It totaled $200,000. Then the department collapsed. My name is Cole, and I'm 49 now. For 25 years, I was the IT contracts and supplier manager for a pretty big company, around 2,000 employees, multiple offices. Basically, I was the glue between the company and every single external service provider we used. Software licenses, hardware, cloud services, telecom, security audits, all of it came through me. Yeah, it sounds boring. It is boring. But here's the thing about boring. When it works, nobody notices. When boring stops, everything goes up in flames. I started there at 24, a fresh-faced entry-level assistant. I moved up slowly, steadily. From procurement assistant to IT contracts manager. Each promotion came with more responsibility and, more importantly, more institutional knowledge that lived nowhere else but in my head. Most people don't get what a contracts manager actually does. They think we just sign papers. Nope. I was the single point of failure for every external service relationship. Email server down at 2 a.m.? I was calling the vendor and they picked up because they knew me. Renegotiate cloud storage costs? I knew exactly where their margin was because I'd tracked their pricing for 8 years. Department heads wanted random software? I'd check, and 9 times out of 10, we already had a license for something equivalent. When I left, we had over 140 active vendor contracts. I could tell you the renewal date, the key contact, the negotiation history, and every single gotcha clause for every single one of them. Not from a database, but from memory. I'd managed some of these relationships longer than most employees had even been at the company. By year 15, I was the only one who understood the full picture. I knew which contracts auto-renewed, which ones didn't. Which vendors gave us preferential pricing because of the relationships I built. I knew our telecom contract had a clause, buried on page 47, that saved us $90,000 a year if you renewed before March. And I remembered to do it every year for 10 years straight. That's $900,000 I saved the company just by checking a calendar. I also knew where the bodies were buried. Which vendor owed us a credit from 2014. Which software license was technically expired, but the vendor hadn't noticed, saving us $12,000 a year by not reminding them. Questionable ethics? Maybe. Did anyone above me care? Not in the slightest. All of it was in my head, or in my personal documentation system, spreadsheets, notes, relationship maps I built over 2 decades on my own laptop. My wife, Laura, used to joke I was more married to that company than to her. She wasn't wrong. I missed anniversaries, worked weekends, took calls on vacation. But I believed in what I was doing. I wasn't passionate like some LinkedIn guru. I was just good at it. And being good at something for a long time creates a loyalty that's hard to shake. It was my territory, my relationships, my systems. I never expected a parade, but I also never expected what came next. About 18 months ago, the company got a new CEO. He brought in his own people, as they do. Most were fine, but my new direct boss, Drew, was not fine. Drew was maybe 35, an MBA from somewhere impressive sounding. He had this frantic energy, like he'd read every business book since 2020 and was trying to apply them all at once. His first week, he wanted alignment meetings. When he met with me, he spent 40 minutes asking about my KPIs and my value proposition to the org. I told him, I manage contracts and vendor relationships. He just nodded, scribbling in his notebook. I had a feeling it wasn't flattering. Over the next few months, Drew started making changes. He brought in 2 of his friends, a digital transformation specialist, nobody knew what that meant, and a strategic sourcing analyst. Both were 15+ years younger than me. Both made more than me. Neither could tell you the difference between a SaaS contract and a sandwich. I remember one meeting perfectly. Drew held a department vision session, yes, that's what he called it. He projected slides with buzzwords, synergy, agile procurement, vendor ecosystem optimization. He asked everyone for their North Star metric. When it was my turn, I said, I make sure we don't waste money on vendor contracts. He stared at me for a full 4 seconds, then asked, "Can you be more specific about how that aligns with our transformation pillars?" I shot back, "I saved the company $90,000 a year just by remembering one phone call. Is that specific enough?" He just moved on. After that meeting, things shifted fast. Drew stopped inviting me to leadership syncs. He CC'd his buddies on emails that used to be just for me. Our one-on-ones got rescheduled 3 times, then vanished. It was death by 1,000 calendar changes. The writing was on the wall. Drew wanted his people in every seat. And my seat was the one he wanted most, because it came with budget authority. He had no idea. Drew, this 35-year-old MBA, was trying to push out a guy who'd been there for 25 years. A guy who personally saved the company nearly $1 million a decade just by remembering a date. That's like firing your expert navigator because you bought a cheap GPS. Drew was in danger, and he didn't even know it yet. Captain Corner Office was about to learn a very expensive lesson. Here's how it played out, step by painful step. You need to recognize these patterns. Drew started giving me less work. He reassigned contracts to his buddies. He told me to focus on wrapping up current projects and avoid taking on new ones. Classic squeeze-out move. If you've been managed out, you know the playbook. They don't fire you. They make your job disappear until you quit. But I didn't quit. I'd been doing this too long. I'd seen 3 rounds of layoffs, 2 mergers, and a CEO walked out by security for fraud. I knew how corporate politics worked. The person who quits gets nothing. The person who gets pushed gets a package. And the person who gets pushed while holding all the institutional knowledge, that person gets whatever they want. So I waited. I kept doing my job, managing contracts, saving money, maintaining relationships. But I also started doing something smarter. I documented everything. Every email where Drew redirected work away from me. Every meeting I was excluded from. Every contract his unqualified friends fumbled. I kept a folder, physical and digital, with dates, names, specifics. Not because I was planning a lawsuit, not yet anyway, but because in corporate environments, the person with the receipts wins. I also started quietly looking for a new job. I updated my resume for the first time in 15 years. It was an adventure. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at a blank document, trying to describe what I did. Knowing where all the vendor bodies are buried doesn't translate well to a CV. Laura sat down, read what I had, and said, "You need to actually list what you've done." We spent the whole weekend on it. She made me quantify everything. Money saved, contracts managed, relationships maintained. By Sunday night, my resume was 3 pages long. I sent it to a recruiter specializing in procurement. She called me back within 2 hours. Said my background was exactly what 3 of her clients were looking for. Within 3 weeks, I had 2 solid offers, both paying more with better benefits. One even offered a signing bonus. I didn't know those existed outside of professional sports. I accepted the better offer, but I didn't tell anyone at work. Not yet. I wanted to see what Drew would do. If he left me alone, I'd serve a reasonable notice. If he pushed me out, well, that's what the documentation was for. Laura asked me one night if I was okay. "You've been checking your email at midnight for 3 weeks, she said. She was right. I was anxious. Not about losing my job, I'd mentally moved on. But 25 years is a long time. That company was the only professional home I'd ever known, my entire adult life. Walking away, even being pushed, felt like leaving a house you grew up in. Even if the new owners are terrible, you still feel something when you drive past it." Then Drew made his move. He called a meeting with me and HR. We sat in a conference room with a window view. Very deliberate, very important. He told me that after a thorough review of departmental needs, my role was redundant and the company was moving in a different strategic direction. He said it with a straight face, like he'd rehearsed it. HR handed me a packet, severance terms, transition timeline, the whole thing. And that's when I noticed something Drew clearly had not. The redundancy payout. I'd been there 25 years. Under our old employment terms, from before the last 2 CEO changes, redundancy was calculated at 1 month's salary per year of service, plus accrued benefits, plus unused vacation. I had 8 weeks banked because I never took time off. plus a pension bridge payment for employees over 45 with more than 20 years of service. Drew didn't know about the pension bridge. HR did, but Drew had apparently pushed this through without asking them to calculate the total first. The number came to just over $200,000. I saw the HR lady's face when she slid the paperwork across. She knew. She absolutely knew what this was going to cost his budget. Drew did not. He was still smiling. I said, I'd like to review this with my attorney before signing. Drew's smile flickered. Of course, take your time. I will, I replied calmly. Also, I accept the new position I was offered last week, so my last day will be in 2 weeks regardless. But I'll take the redundancy package as well, since you've declared the role redundant. The color drained from Drew's face. It was like watching someone process a car accident in slow motion. First, confusion. Then, calculation. Then, the slow, horrifying realization that he just wrote a check his budget couldn't cash. The HR lady looked at Drew. Drew looked at the packet. He flipped to the page with the total and read it twice. His jaw did this weird thing, moving sideways, like he was chewing on nothing. Then he looked at me and stammered, "We should discuss this further." "I don't think we need to," I said. "You declared the role redundant. This is the cost of that declaration. It's all in the employment contract you apparently didn't read before making this decision." The HR lady, bless her, didn't react visibly. But I could tell from the way she gathered her papers that she had tried to warn Drew. That packet didn't surprise her. She'd done the math. He just didn't ask her first. That's the thing about guys like Drew. They don't ask, they announce. And then they're surprised when the announcement comes with a price tag. I shook their hands and walked out. Took the elevator down, waved at Raymond, the security guard who actually knew my name, and walked to my car. I called Laura. She answered on the first ring. She'd been waiting. I told her what happened. She was quiet for a second, then said, $200,000? Yes, I confirmed. Cole, she said, I'm proud of you. Then, now come home. I'm making pot roast. That pot roast was the best meal I'd had in 25 years. This man sat in a meeting designed to humiliate him and walked out holding a $200,000 check and a better job. Drew thought he was firing the janitor. Turns out he was firing the architect. And the architect kept the blueprints. He had no idea what he had just done. My last 2 weeks were interesting. Drew tried to get me to document my processes. I wrote a 5-page overview. Here are the vendors. Here are the contract dates. Here's how to access the procurement portal. Surface-level stuff. Everything a competent person would need to get started. What I didn't include was the 25 years of context that made those contracts actually work, the relationships, the handshake deals, the vendor reps who'd pick up the phone for me at 9 p.m. because I'd helped them hit their quotas for 15 straight years. The knowledge of which contracts had exploitable clauses and which were ironclad. The memory of every negotiation, every concession, every favor owed and given. That stuff wasn't in any document. It lived in my head. And my head was walking out the door. I didn't do this maliciously. To be clear, nobody asked me for that level of detail. Drew never sat down with me once during those 2 weeks to learn the role. Not once. He was too busy onboarding his buddy into my position, the strategic sourcing analyst who was now becoming the IT contracts manager, despite having 0 contracts experience. Drew told HR it would be a smooth transition. HR apparently just looked at him for a long time without saying anything. A few longtime employees, people who'd been there almost as long as me, came by my desk to say goodbye. Patricia from accounting, Jim from facilities, Sandra who ran the front desk. They understood what was happening. Sandra said quietly, "This place is going to fall apart without you, Cole, and I hope it does." I told her that was harsh. She just said, "It's not harsh. It's math." My last day was a Friday. I cleaned out my desk. 25 years, and it all fit in one box. A couple of photos of Laura and the kids. A coffee mug that said World's Okayest Contracts Manager. Some outdated reference books. That was it. Raymond, the security guard, walked me out. He said, "Mr. Cole, I'm going to miss you. You're the only person in this building who ever learned my name. His name is Raymond." He held the door open, and I walked to my car in space B47. The same space for 25 years. I sat there for maybe 10 minutes. Didn't cry, but I let it all land. I mean, 25 years and his stuff fits in one box? That's not sad. That's a man who kept his personal life out of his professional space. He was there to work, not to decorate. And Raymond's comment? That told me everything about Cole and everything about that company. This wasn't just a workplace story. This was what happens when corporations treat people like spreadsheet lines. I started my new job the following Monday. Different company, different industry, same kind of work. My new boss, Garrett, sat down with me on day one and said, "I read your resume. You managed 140 contracts solo for 25 years. I'm not going to pretend to understand how you did that. Just do it here and tell me if you need anything." That was it. No alignment meetings, no vision sessions, no transformation pillars. Just do your thing and let me know. I almost teared up. Almost. Meanwhile, back at the old company, for weeks was all it took for everything to fall apart. I know this because Patricia kept me updated through texts. She felt guilty, like she was gossiping. I told her she was performing a public service. Week 1, Drew's buddy missed the telecom contract renewal deadline. Remember that page 47 clause? The one that saved $90,000 a year? Gone. The contract auto-renewed at the full rate. $90,000. Poof. Because nobody checked the calendar. Patricia said Drew's face when the bill came in was like a guy who just realized he left his wallet at a restaurant after it closed. He tried to get the vendor to retroactively apply the discount. The rep, Dale, who I'd worked with for 11 years, told Drew's buddy that clause was negotiated by Cole personally. It doesn't carry over to new management without renegotiation. Then Dale offered to renegotiate at current market rates, which were higher. Drew declined. The company ate the $90,000. Week 2, a major software vendor sent a license audit notice. I always handled these because I knew exactly which licenses we were using and which were, let's say, creatively allocated. Without me, the vendor flagged 18 unlicensed installations. The compliance penalty was estimated at over $100,000. These audits aren't a surprise, they're regular. The trick is being prepared. I kept a clean audit file, updated quarterly. Takes 4 hours every 3 months. Drew's buddy didn't do it. In the 6 weeks since I left, nobody had tracked any changes. The vendor's auditor found 18 unlicensed installations. Could have been resolved easily if someone had maintained the file. Nobody was. Week 3, 3 vendor contracts expired without renewal because Drew's buddy didn't even know they existed. One was our managed backup service. The backup stopped running on a Tuesday. Nobody noticed until Friday. 3 days of data with no backup. The CTO reportedly lost it. Week 3.5. This one reportedly caused an actual shouting match in the executive suite. Someone on Drew's team signed a renewal on a printing services contract without reading it. The contract I'd spent 3 years negotiating down from 42 cents per page to 18 cents per page. The renewal auto-populated at the original rate because Drew's buddy didn't know there was a negotiated rate attached to my name specifically. The company was now locked into a 5-year printing contract at more than double what they'd been paying. For a 2,000-person company that prints a lot of paper. Patricia estimated the overspend at roughly $60,000 a year for 5 years. That's $300,000 on paper. The CFO reportedly threw a stapler. Week 4. The security audit vendor I'd had a personal relationship with for 12 years refused to work with Drew's replacement. They said, "We had a relationship with Cole. We don't have a relationship with your company." They dropped us. Finding a replacement security auditor at the same rate took 3 months. Drew's budget was wrecked. I mean wrecked. My redundancy payout, $200,000. Telecom clause missed, $90,000 per year, locked in. Software compliance penalties, approximately $100,000. Printing contract overspend, $300,000 over 5 years. Security vendor replacement, 4 times the previous rate. 3 expired contracts requiring emergency renegotiation. His department was over $400,000 in the red for the quarter. Probably closer to $500,000 once you factor in the consulting fees. 4 to 500 grand from a guy who pushed me out to save money on my $78,000 salary. The math just wasn't matching, Drew. The consulting firm they hired is interesting, by the way. Patricia said they sent 2 people, both younger than me, both billing $320 an hour each. So, $640 an hour combined. They've been there for 2 months and have stabilized about 60% of the vendor relationships. The other 40% are still in disarray. 2 months, $640 an hour, and they're at 60% of what I used to handle solo, while also answering emails and chatting with Raymond about his grandkids. I heard through the grapevine, and I want to be careful here, that Drew had a very uncomfortable meeting with the CFO about 6 weeks after I left. The CFO apparently asked him, "Did you calculate the total cost of losing Cole before you made this decision?" Drew apparently said, "The role was redundant." The CFO shot back, "The role generated $900,000 in savings over the last decade. What part of that is redundant?" I also heard, and this part is almost too perfect, that the security audit vendor sent Drew a very polite email explaining their relationship was with me personally, that I'd secured them preferential rates based on mutual trust, and that without that personal guarantee, their standard rates would apply. The standard rate was 4 times what we'd been paying. Drew forwarded the email to the CFO with the subject line, "Vendor price gouging." The CFO reportedly replied, "That's not price gouging. That's what happens when you fire the guy who negotiated the discount." Drew is still there, last I checked, but his digital transformation project got defunded. His buddy got reassigned to a different department, and the company is currently paying a consulting firm $320 an hour to do what I used to do for $78,000 a year. As for me, I'm 3 months into my new job. Better pay, better team, better boss. Garrett sent me a message after my first month. "You've already saved us 40 grand on the cloud storage renegotiation. At this rate, you'll have paid for yourself by June." That felt good to read. Not vindictive, just good. Like being appreciated for the first time in a long time. I used part of the redundancy payout to pay off my mortgage. Laura cried when I showed her the statement with the 0 balance. "We'd been carrying that mortgage for 19 years. She said, "I always thought we'd be 60 before that was gone." I told her, "Me too." Thank Drew. She didn't laugh, but she smiled. The rest of the payout is in an index fund. Laura and I are talking about a real vacation. Not a check email by the pool vacation, but an actual disconnected trip. First one in maybe 15 years. She wants to go to Italy. I want to go anywhere she wants to go. She's earned it more than I have. Raymond, the security guard, texted me last week. He said, "Mr. Cole, they still can't figure out the vendor portal." I overhear things. I told him if he ever needs a reference, I've got him. He sent back a thumbs up emoji. My old colleague Patricia called, too. "Cole, the new guy just auto-renewed a contract you spent 3 years negotiating down. We're locked in at 30% above market rate for 5 years. I just laughed. Not because it was funny, but because what else can you do? She also told me that Drew's digital transformation specialist, his other buddy, quietly resigned. Apparently, he realized that without me there to manage the existing vendor infrastructure, his job was basically impossible. He was trying to build a digital transformation on top of a foundation that was actively crumbling. You can't renovate a house that's on fire. Drew tried. It didn't work. Patricia mentioned something else that caught me off guard. She said a few of the newer employees, people who never worked with me, have been asking, "Who is this Cole guy everyone keeps talking about?" Apparently, my name comes up in meetings constantly. Every time something breaks, or a vendor won't cooperate, or a contract turns out to be worse than expected, somebody says, "Cole used to handle this." I've become a ghost story. The cautionary tale of what happens when you get rid of the person who knows everything. I don't know how I feel about that, honestly. Part of me is flattered. Part of me is sad. Mostly, I'm just glad I don't have to deal with it anymore. 25 years of institutional knowledge, $200,000 in severance, and a company that still hasn't figured out what I actually did. I hope they figure it out eventually. I'm not holding my breath, though. Laura and I went out to dinner last weekend to celebrate the mortgage payoff. Nothing fancy, just an Italian place near our house we've been going to for years. The owner, Gino, came over and asked how things were going. I told him I'd switched jobs. He said, "Good for you. You looked tired the last few years." Even the restaurant guy noticed. I didn't realize how worn down I was until I wasn't anymore. Sometimes I think about going back. Not to work there. Never that. But just to walk through the building one more time, past Raymond's desk, past the conference room where Drew tried to end my career, past the server room where I once spent a whole weekend negotiating an emergency cloud migration because our vendor's data center flooded, and I was the only person who had the backup vendor's emergency line saved in my phone. That was 2019, a Wednesday night. I remember because my wife had made pot roast, and I missed it. She saved me a plate, though. She always does. One more thing. I keep a sticky note on my monitor at the new job. It says, page 47. Laura asked me what it meant. I told her it's a reminder. A reminder that the details matter. That the boring stuff, the clauses, the renewal dates, the handshake deals, the vendor's emergency phone number, that's what holds everything together. And when nobody's paying attention to the boring stuff, that's when it all falls apart. Drew didn't pay attention to the boring stuff. I was the boring stuff. And now he's paying $320 an hour for someone else to try to be the boring stuff. And they're not even good at it. So, here's my question for you. If you were in my shoes, would you have just taken the payout and left quietly? Or would you have fought the redundancy declaration? Genuinely curious what you guys would have done in my place. Let me know in the comments below.